Okay, I'd like to welcome Chris Sarns. Chris Sarns is a researcher for Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. He's also a co-author of a series of articles, along with Simon Faulkner, detailing the misinformation surrounding the collapse of World Trade Center Number 7, which was provided by the National Institute for Standards and Technology. So, Chris, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Now, I'd like you just to let us know, how did you get involved in this? When did it become an issue?
Well, in 2005, I was just channel surfing and I came across a, quote, conspiracy theory program. So I decided to watch a little bit, and they showed the video of World Trade Center 7 imploding. And I knew instantly that it was a controlled demolition. It's like a 6-second video. But the fact that it went straight down, and I know as a contractor and a fan of the Lisboa family who invented building imploding, that it was a controlled demolition. That's the only thing that can bring a building straight down. So that was kind of a shock, and didn't know quite what to do with it. As soon as I saw that, it took me about 2 or 3 seconds to do the math and realize that if that was a controlled demolition, whoever did it had to have known the trade towers were coming down. And therefore, the whole thing was an inside job. And that's when I had my oh shit moment. And just my life changed at that point.
Okay.
So it was a couple of months later that I saw, I couldn't quite accept it. So a couple months later, on the anniversary of September 11th in 2005, I watched very closely, and they had the program America Rebuilds. They had a little clip in there. It was a different clip, but another clip of Building 7 coming down, and there it was, right in the video America Rebuilds, and it was obviously and indisputably a controlled demolition. So that was kind of it for me. I didn't really know what to do. I hadn't really been on the internet very much at that point. I just recently got my computer, and I wasn't really using the internet for anything much. And finally around December, I just decided I've got to do something. I can't sit on this any longer. So I finally had the idea of going on the internet. So I just typed in World Trade Center Building 7. And the first site that came up was WTC7.net that Jim Hoffman put together. And that's where I started. I found, references there to all kinds of different things, including the Loose Change Forum and the Loose Change video with Dylan Avery and Jason Burmis and Corey Rove put together, which was just an excellent video, and pretty much kicked the whole thing into high gear because of the music and the way it was put together. It just captured the imagination of an entire generation.
Yeah.
And it kind of got the thing really moving. I think probably Dylan Avery and Jason Burmis and Corey Rove have done more for the truth movement than anyone. Right after them would come David Ray Griffin and Kevin Ryan, Stephen Jones and Richard Gage and others. But I really think that those 3 young men are the ones that really expanded the truth movement to become something really significant. So anyway, I went to their forum and got into long discussions there. And it was, at that time, it was just a beehive of activity and people doing research and finding new things all the time and arguing with the other side, the people who, fanatically defend the government position, and which is always interesting. But it's good to argue with them because if there's any flaw in your theory, they will find it. And they have corrected me several times. Like from when I was arguing at the Loose Change Forum, Dylan Avery jumped in and said, hey, why don't you take this over to the JREF Forum, the JREF, James Randi Educational Forum. And I had no idea what that was, so someone else else told me, here it is, go there and find out. And basically it was a government supporting forum, anti-conspiracy theory, and it was rather blatantly, I don't know what to say, sponsored by the government.
Okay, I understand you.
These people, pardon?
I understand.
Yeah, the people over there are just nothing registered. They have an argument against everything.
Yeah.
They do mental backflips trying to think of alternate explanations when you tell them about molten metal or explosions or anything else that destroys the official conspiracy theory,
Okay, so they're not taking any of the information or the evidence that you're providing on board at all?
No. All they do is they gather together and they got their little playbook of rebuttals, okay? Yeah. And they all read from the same playbook, and they all, of course, insult you up one side and down the other and try to turn it into a personal pissing match. And it took me a while to get used to that because they're pretty good at pissing you off.
Yeah.
And after a while, you just get immune to it and just ignore it. And but like I say, they are useful in the respect that if there's anything wrong with your argument, they will find it. And also, they were a wealth of information because it's pretty obvious they're connected to the government because they had access to information that no one else had.
Right, I see.
And they would use it to make their point, and I would go read this article or that article or document and find out that, wait a minute, no, it doesn't make your point. It actually destroys your point if you read a little further. So I got a lot of really, really useful information from the lovely lads at JREF, and I used it against them. As a matter of fact, by arguing with them, I discovered two main important things: that the original theory, hypothesis, that diesel fuel fires and damage from the trade towers brought Building 7 down.
Okay.
That was their original hypothesis. And I proved both of those things to be wrong using the information that the guys at JREF gave me.
Okay.
And the diesel fuel fires are pretty obvious. In the FEMA 403 report on Building 7, they say where all the diesel tanks, fuel lines, and pumps and everything else are. And after reading through that carefully and reconstructing it in my mind, I realized that all the diesel fuel pumps, tanks, and pipes are all in the west end of the building, except for this one generator room in the northeast corner of the 5th floor.
Okay.
And that's where the collapse supposedly began. As it turns out later, Tony Zambati made a very astute observation that I had missed and everyone else had missed, is that the east penthouse fell to the 47th floor and no further.
Okay, and how did he determine that?
Well, as the penthouse collapsed in, you can see light all of a sudden coming through a group of windows on the left end of the 47th floor.
Okay.
But just a few windows. And then it kind of gets dimmer and then nothing. So, in other words, the roof fell in and all the stuff that was in that penthouse, which is like air conditioning and heating equipment, fell down to the 47th floor and stopped. And some of the windows you could see daylight coming through because the roof was gone. And the ones where you couldn't see daylight coming through is just because they had everything piled in front of it.
Right, I see. Okay.
So if the 47th floor had collapsed and everything had fell down further, you would see light through more windows on more floors, but you only see light through a few windows on the 47th floor. So that in itself, just that very simple observation that Tony made, destroys their entire theory about the east end collapsing internally. It didn't.
Okay.
And there's also further proof. Someone took the video and added color to it, added purple and various other colors. And in doing so, you can see a shock wave going down through the building. And the
Okay.
shock wave goes top to bottom. Well, if there was a collapse on the bottom, there wouldn't be a shock wave. You would see distortion up through the building all at once because those columns are effectively one piece from the floor to the roof. So you wouldn't see a shock wave. Seeing a shock wave tells you that everything fell to the 47th floor, creating that shock wave that went down through the building.
Okay.
So those two things pretty much right there destroy the official conspiracy theory, or the official collapse theory, excuse me. But anyway, getting back to the diesel fuel fires, I determined by looking at page, I believe it's 26 in the FEMA report, that they show a picture of the northwest corner with big red arrows pointing to the louvers and the generator room on the 5th floor. And theoretically, that's where NIST was trying to say the fire heated column 79 to the point where it weakened and broke, or, bent, collapsed, whatever, and that started the collapse that brought the whole building down. Well, I argued that one, there's no smoke coming out of those louvers, and if there was a fire, diesel fuel makes thick black smoke. And if the louvers were closed, then the fire would starve for oxygen and burn itself out without harming anything.
Okay.
And I argued this round and round and round with the J-Reppers until I was satisfied that they did not have a suitable answer. And I posted my results over at the Loose Change Forum. And a month later, in December of 2007, I posted in November of 2007, NIST gave up the diesel fuel fire thing in their December 18th, 2007 release of their progress report or whatever it was. So I have a feeling that had I not challenged that diesel fuel fire theory, that they might never have done that. So I don't know if I'm responsible, but it's possible.
Oh, no, okay, that makes a lot of sense. What I would say is that the official story does tell us that the building was ravaged by fire, and that this fire raged uncontrolled because the fire brigades were not able to respond to it because of the lack of water in that area because of the damage that had taken place. So, I mean, what do we say to this? Because if an uncontrolled fire is ravaging a building and is weakening steel, is it not feasible that the actual steel structure does come apart?
Good question, and a lot of people wonder about that. The problem is the fires only burn for 20 to 30 minutes in any one location. And Building 7 had fireproofing good for 3 hours on the columns and 2 hours on the floor joists, floor beams. So even if the fire had burned, it did burn for 7 hours, but not in the same place. And there wasn't adequate fire protection to keep the steel from heating up. But even more so, another thing that I noticed was on page, I believe it's 26 again, of the Appendix L report of the June 2004 progress report, that it says there's a photograph showing that by 12 p.m. or 12:45 p.m., the fire on floor 12 had burned out. Well, the fire on floor 12 was supposedly the one that expanded the beams under floor 13, caused them to expand and push the girder off its seat.
Okay.
Well, it couldn't possibly have done that because it had burned out over an hour before.
I mean, is it possible that if during the fire the temperatures were sufficient, I mean, is it possible that metal can expand like that and can distort and break away from the frame that it was built to be?
Well, no, that's another fallacy, is that while arguing with the lovely lads at JREV, Tony and I were arguing with them, and I brought up the idea that, well, first of all, at a certain point, steel starts to sag when it loses its strength.
Okay.
At 600 degrees, it's lost half its strength, and it's going to start sagging. And I postulated that by the time the beams were heated enough to push the girder off, it's expanded enough to push the girder off its seat, they would have sagged and stopped it from expanding. So Tony did the math on it, and sure enough, he came up with the thing that I think the maximum expansion is 4 3/4 inches, or maybe 5 3/4 inches, I forget. But anyway, it was not 5.4 inches, I forget. It was not enough to push the girder off the seat, even with the 11-inch seat, much less the 6-inch, the 12-inch seat that they had to finally admit to. So, you could not heat the beams enough to push the girder off the seat. And the way they got it to work at all was they applied all that heat from 4 hours of heating to 1.5 seconds. So the beams didn't have a chance to sag. All the expansion went to one end, which is also false. The expansion would go to both ends. So there's a number of reasons that someone else, Jerry Can, I don't know if you know him, you might.
Not sure.
He determined that the girder also expanded and would have been pushed up against the side plate of column 79, preventing it from being pushed off.
Okay.
And then David Cole found out that they had left off the flange stiffeners, which also the web stiffeners, which also stiffened the bottom flange and would have prevented the bottom flange from folding if it had been able to be pushed off, which it couldn't have been for the two reasons I've already given. So now you've got three different reasons why their theory just does not work. And getting back to, we skipped over the fires, I also determined that the fires, looking at all the photographs, that the fires had been burning in the corner of floor 5 at 3:15. And these are photographs right from the NIST report. So if they were burning there at 3:15 and they only burned for a half an hour, by 3:45, the fires in the northeast corner of floor 5 had burned out. So that's actually an hour and a half before the collapse. So So the fires could not possibly, actually in this report, I later found out, and it's in my other 5-part series that I'm rewriting, and we'll get back up on AE 11 Truth soon, that they actually said that the fires caused the collapse after 4 hours of burning. Well, they started their time at noon. So after 4 hours of burning was 4 o'clock. So according to them, the collapse started at 4 o'clock. So there's another reason. It's just absolute insanity, absurdity, that according to the actual NIST report, if you read it and figure out what it is they're really saying, they're saying that the damage was done after 4 hours of burning. We started the time at noon. In other words, the critical damage was done at 4 o'clock, yet that girder sit there and hung in midair for an hour and 20 minutes before falling. I mean, it's just ludicrous. So the whole thing, from many, many, many angles, is just, absurd to anyone who actually takes the time to study the report.
Okay, but the fact is that this report was made by a government institution, National Institute for Standards and Technology. So surely architects, engineers, mathematicians, insurance specialists have been scrutinizing all of this information. So why is it only a small handful of people seem to have identified these serious issues?
Well, it's because someone told Sham Sunder, I'm sure they made him an offer he couldn't refuse. And the same with everyone else at NIST. Although it's very interesting to note that Sham Sunder was put in charge of NIST shortly before the 2004 progress report came out. So imagine that he was the man on the inside whom they promoted to run the thing and, perpetrate the hoax, because he's really a good liar. He can stand up in front of an audience like he did and just tell the most outrageous lies.
Okay.
And whereas John Gross is a terrible liar. He shows when he lies. So,
Right, yeah, okay, I understand.
But I wonder, can we really blame them? Are they really bad guys, or did someone make them an offer they couldn't refuse? Like just what happened with Bernie Sanders recently, shifting all of a sudden for no good reason. He was going to go through the convention, and all of a sudden he's endorsing Hillary. And a lot of people, and myself included, have wondered, did somebody make him an offer he couldn't refuse? So that sort of thing does happen.
Yeah, we can understand that. What we have been told is that during the day that there's an engineer, or at least a team of engineers perhaps from the office of Mayor Giuliani, were actually in building number 7, and they were performing tests, and they determined from their engineering tests that the building was set to collapse. In fact, they predicted very accurately the time, but is it normal for an engineer to go into a burning building and perform tests? What kind of tests is it possible to carry out under those circumstances?
There were no tests. They just went in there and, using their little playbook of ridiculous reasoning, the reasons that, well, it was creaking and there were fires and they couldn't put them out and there was a lot of damage, and the creaking was, if you have girders and beams hanging, you're going to have creaking. But the damage was not all that bad, and they even admit in the Appendix L report of 2004 that the damage where the holes were knocked in the southwest part of the south face, the weight was redistributed to the surrounding columns, and there was no collapse. So that was the only real reason. And the kicker here is it was Chief Hayden on the BBC report, The Third Tower, who was talking about how he's the one who revealed it was an engineer, some nameless engineer, who told them very accurately 5 hours in advance that the building would collapse if they let it go 5 hours. This is another study in absurdity, because the fires that supposedly brought the building down hadn't even reached the northeast corner. As a matter of fact, at 1 o'clock, when this so-called engineer made his so-called prediction, the only fires were on floor 7 in the west end of the building and on floor 12 on the south side, and just a few offices, 2 relatively moderate, certainly not huge fires. And the damage had nothing to do with the collapse, which started theoretically at the other end of the building.
And has anyone made any attempt to speak to this engineer, or anyone involved?
No, it was just a quote by a fire chief in the British piece. It's unsubstantiated. They didn't say who he was, and of course you can't get anything out of anyone. They've made their last statement, and they're not going to answer any questions because they can't. So we're just left with this absurd. How anybody could possibly predict that a building would fall due to fire 5 hours before it actually fell, given that there were only 2 fires on 2 floors, nowhere near where the collapse began. It's just absurd. It's just absolutely absurd.
It has been said, though, that there was a significant gouge in the building that happened from the collapse of one of the towers, that a large portion of the falling tower had taken several stories from the corner of World Trade Center number 7. Is it possible that could be considered a serious structural damage that could have been a contributory factor?
Well, there's a couple of these here I want to cover. We missed one. There was, first of all, the damage to the southwest corner was very serious. But, as it said in the 2004 progress report, the weight, because of the stiffness of the exterior frame, all the above weight was shifted to the surrounding columns, and there was no collapse. And another interesting point is the same Chief Hayden said that there was a bulge in the corner between floors 10 and 13. Well, that's very interesting, because the corner was gone. There was no corner on floors 10 to 13. So there's another absurd statement, and they use that as to say that bulge, was a sign that the building was going to collapse. How can there be a bulge in the corner when the corner is gone? It's, another absurdity. But getting back to the other damage that they had talked about originally, the 10-story gouge in the center, that was another thing that I argued over at JREF and proved to be false.
Okay.
And actually, Sham Sunder went to the Popular Mechanics debunking article, supposedly, and said that the 10-story gouge, 1/3 the width, 1/4 the depth, floor 10 to the ground, indeed existed. There was this gouge, which was a lie, to put it bluntly.
Okay.
There was no gouge. There was one statement on page 18 of the Appendix L report talking about this gouge, but on the same page, there are two other statements that refute it. One was that firefighters leaving the building saw no heavy debris in the lobby, which is where it all would have landed had there been this 10-story gouge. So whatever hit the building plus the entire front of the building would have been piled up in the lobby, but there was no heavy debris. Another one was that the atrium glass was still intact, and the atrium is in front and would have been taken out if this supposed gouge were there. Plus, Chief Fellini, who was in charge at Building 7, said that steel was ripped out between the 3rd and the 6th floor. Well, that is in contrast to a 10-story gouge. And here's the guy who's in charge describing the damage quite differently. And then in the FEMA report, a firefighter walking along the 9th floor said the only damage to the 9th floor was in the northeast corner. So you have 4 different statements refuting that 10-story gouge. Now, I started a thread over there at the JREF forum that went 2 years and 5,000 posts. And finally, in the final report, on page 183, there is a listing of the damage to the south side of Building 7.
Okay.
And that 10-story gouge is not there. They didn't bother to explain, that they got it wrong. They just went on as if nothing had happened. But
Okay.
it never was, and Sham Sunder not only lied about the 10-story gouge, but also lied about a fire that lasted 7 hours in the northeast generator room. Now, the fire may have lasted 7 hours from the time it started till the building came down, but there was never a fire reported in the northeast generator room, and no proof that there was one, no reason to think there was one. It was just a total fabrication.
Okay, I mean...
So, the bottom line, Sham Sunder lied twice, and the debunking article in Popular Mechanics magazine was itself a bunch of bunk.
Okay, so if this is where we're at, we've got people in these positions of responsibility telling direct lies. I mean, what are the implications of lying in this kind of a professional context?
Well, they should not only lose their license, they should probably do some hard time. But like I say, it's not them. I would go to the people telling them what to do. That's who we really need to go after. We need to go up the chain of command. And these are just the foot soldiers who are stuck in front, having to tell lies to the public. And so, yeah, they should definitely lose their life. That's who we have to go after directly.
Yeah.
And we try to, but the courts are also, as George Carlin so aptly put it, they've got the judges in their back pocket. The judicial system has been so corrupted that they will not forward any charges. They will not file charges. They will not charge anybody with anything. They will not investigate anything.
Okay.
Because they know darn well that to do so is a career ender, if not a life ender.
Okay, that brings us to a point. Now, recently, the American Institute of Architects, the convention, there was a vote on whether there should be a fresh investigation into the events of 9/11. but it only produced an 11% support for a new investigation. And I suppose the question is it that most of those professional people, is it that they can't see the obvious, or is it the fear that the system will not seek out justice, but rather punish those who point out the truth?
I don't know. I can't speak. I think it's a little all of the above.
Yeah.
I think most of them just don't want to deal with it. They just can't admit that it's true. I got to hand it to the American Institute of Architects. They are the one organization that has allowed us to have our booth at their conventions and show the truth. They have been, they've actually become more supportive of us and allowed us to put forward this resolution. Last year it got 4%. This year it got 11%. We learn as we go along. We're going to do it again next year, and we should get a higher percentage.
And do you need to get 50%?
I have no idea if we'll ever get the 50%, but it will grow. And the point is, it's like just baby steps. We have to just keep pushing and putting one foot in front of the other. We are making progress. It's slow. It's painful. But Richard is a workaholic, and he has dedicated his life to this.
Yeah.
And he will be successful eventually. Okay?
Yeah. Okay.
That's why I enjoy working with him. He's a great man.
Excellent. I spoke to Richard just yesterday as well. So let's think about the controlled demolition. So we accept that it is a controlled demolition. We really need to understand what is involved. I mean, technically, what is required to bring a building down? Is it possible that if a fire chief decided to pull it and called Larry Silverstein, that they could arrange something and make a girder move such that the whole building can come down? I mean, how do you bring a building down?
Well, first of all, it takes weeks. Okay, they couldn't even get everything to the site in the time they had, much less rig it. Okay, it would be absolutely impossible to do it in one day. It takes weeks because you have to design, you have to figure out, how much you need, and then you've got to get in there and rig, because they had to actually remove all the supporting structure on 8 floors.
Yeah.
And I postulated a long time ago, because I've actually built offices like the ones they had there with the drop ceilings. And everything above the drop ceiling is open from one end to the other.
Yeah, yeah.
Except for certain walls, if you have tape storage or a meeting room that has to be sealed off sound-wise. But most of it is wide open. So it's very easy just to get a ladder, remove the ceiling tile next to the wall where the column is, get your spray bottle to soak everything down so you don't get too much dust, scrape off the sprayed-on insulation, install your pre-made Nano Thermite column cutter, which doesn't make a great deal of noise because the Nano Thermite there's a patent on a Nano Thermite device to bring down concrete buildings by just melting through the concrete.
Okay.
And if it can melt through concrete, which melts at 32 to 3,800 degrees, or 32 to 4,500 degrees, it can melt through iron and steel, which melts at 27 to 2,800 degrees.
Right,
easily.
okay.
So you just build a device that you can just scrape off the insulation, slide it on there, and it's held in place with, however, with thumb screws or whatever. And you could do this on nights and weekends when no one was around.
Okay, and was anybody operating in the building? Would it had that kind of access?
Yeah, well, you walk in there with your Acme wiring uniforms, okay, and you do it under the guise of rewiring, because in those kind of buildings, those commercial buildings, there are workmen coming and going all the time. There's always remodeling or rewiring going on. It's a common sight. So no one would think twice about seeing, people with spools of wire and boxes of other things coming and going. And they would have absolute access everywhere after everyone has gone home.
Okay. Now, we're just bring things towards a close here, I want to ask about the mainstream media. I mean, the mainstream media seems to have failed to take on any of these concerns or ask any of these serious questions to identify any of the persons involved, who this engineer was that made the claim that the building was going to come down in 5 hours' time. There are lots of different questions, but they're nowhere in all of this. But just how important is alternative media to the truth movement?
Yeah, well, the media is owned by 6 corporations who are in turn owned by the international bankers.
Uh-huh.
And so basically the international bankers own and operate the news media, and we hear what they want us to hear and nothing else. Take, for instance, in 1999, a jury found James Earl Ray innocent of the murder of Martin Luther King. They further found that the CIA, the FBI, and the Memphis Police Department conspired to murder Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah.
That's a conspiracy. That's not a conspiracy theory. That is a conspiracy fact determined in a court of law. But Americans don't know about that.
Yeah.
Because, like I say, the same people who arranged that little murder are still in charge. And people seem to are going on and on about the election. It's the one man who might have made a difference is gone. Although I'm going to vote for Jill Stein.
Yeah. Okay.
At least she's saying what I want done.
Right.
Whether she won't be elected. They've already determined that Hillary's going to win. I mean, the primaries were rigged. I mean, that's a matter of fact.
Yeah.
The difference between the exit polls and what happened is so great that it could not possibly be anything but rigged.
Yeah.
And they will do the same with the main election. I'm going to vote for Jill, knowing that my vote probably won't count, and that Hillary has already been ordained by the powers that be, that she's going to be our next president. And I've just accepted that.
Right.
And, all we can do is just keep telling the truth and hope that enough people get pissed off enough to start listening.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like I say, every year, more and more people, like the difference at the AIA convention from 40% to 11%.
Yep.
Maybe it'll be 30 or 40% next year.
Yep.
It's coming,
Yep.
Eventually, we will get the truth out to everyone. And only when we get critical mass and enough people get really, really pissed off will we actually get something done.
Yeah.
But we still have, like you say, the architects and engineers who voted against the resolution. I think most of them are just in denial. I don't think maybe some of them are afraid, but I think most are just in denial. They can't believe that their government could be so evil.
Right.
Okay? And that's really the problem with most people. They just can't believe their government could do that, in spite of the fact that they took us to war in Iraq based on a pack of lies.
This is the exceptionalism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we're exceptional, all right.
Yeah. Okay. No, I'll accept that point. Okay, just to finish this off, why don't you just tell us what in 15 years do you feel that you have achieved through all of this?
We have laid the groundwork and convinced. I believe now the last poll they took was several years ago, and like 10% flat out believed that it was a controlled demolition and 9/11 was an inside job.
Uh-huh.
I have a feeling it's probably a lot higher than that now. And half the population doubted the official story, okay?
Right, okay, important.
So we need more than just people who doubt. We need more people to expand that 10% of people who say, no doubt about it, Building 7 was a controlled demolition, therefore they were all controlled demolitions.
Yep.
This was an inside job, okay? There's no way that Al-Qaeda could have rigged those buildings, okay? And I've had people tell me that. A good friend, I just convinced him that Building 7 was a controlled demolition, and, Al-Qaeda did it, and I'm going, oh my God, what can I do?
Yeah.
So you just have to let it sit at that point,
Yeah.
and hope that if you plant a seed in a fertile mind, it'll grow.
Yeah.
If you plant a seed in a dead mind, nothing will happen, okay?
Yeah.
And that's just the way it is. We have to deal with a large percentage of effectively brain-dead people.
Well, you said it, Chris. You said it. Okay.
Yep.
I agree. Okay, Chris, thanks very much. It's been a privilege to have you on. Thanks very much for your time. Is there anything that you'd like to contribute just before we close?
Just keep the faith and keep, talk to the people who will listen. If you can see that their mind is closed, just plant the seed and walk away.
Okay. Yeah.
You will not convince them. And I think Building 7 is the key. Just let them watch the video of Building 7 coming down. Even if they deny it, they will know inside their heart and inside their brain, yeah, that's a controlled demolition. Just plant the seed, and in their fertile mind, it will grow.
Okay. Right, Chris, that's 40 minutes.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, hopefully we can speak again next year.
Yes, anytime. That's what I'm here for. I've got the last 15 years, or actually the last, 10 years now.
Yep.
I've been gathering information, advising Richard, and being more or less the Building 7 expert on the details, and answering people who write into AA 911 Truth. So I'm always anxious to share my knowledge. There's not much point in gathering it all if I can't share it. So thank you very much for allowing me the opportunity to do so.